Hey everybody, welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today we'll be watching The Real War on Christmas, the Plum Pudding Riots by Extra History. Now this is the first of a couple of holiday reactions I'll be doing this season, so Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to everybody watching. Now, judging from the title, this video is going to be about the Puritan attack on Christmas around the time of the English Civil War, an interesting period of history. Now, before we get into this one, I'd appreciate it if you guys would leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and check out my Patreon, which is linked down below. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's jump right into this reaction.
These days, you hear a lot about there being a war on Christmas, which is kind of weird, right? Since every year in the US, we are swamped with public light displays, parades, carols, nativity scenes, plus enough Christmas marketing campaigns to choke a reindeer. Heck, even in Hong Kong, where Rob lives, where only 12% of the population is Christian, Christmas is absolutely everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, Christmas is popular worldwide. Not everywhere, of course. There are certainly a lot of countries that don't celebrate it super widely, but as we saw, even in relatively non-Christian places, Christmas is quite popular as sort of a secular commercial holiday with a lot of its own myths and traditions.
So if there is a war on Christmas, a simple happy holidays isn't exactly going to stem that tide, because the holiday is definitely winning. But what if I told you that a local American government actually banned Christmas entirely, where hanging a wreath, singing carols, or going on a Christmas Eve service would get you fined, and where you were required to go
The Puritans must have something to do with this.
to work on Christmas Day? Well, that government was the Massachusetts Bay Colony, which passed an act against observing Christmas, or any other holiday, in 1659.
Yeah.
And they weren't alone in doing so. Because in the 1640s, the Puritan-dominated Parliament in England and their fellow Calvinists in Scotland also banned Christmas, leading to riots, propaganda, and yes, contributing to a real, actual war.
Yeah. I mean, the Puritans' attempt to ban Christmas and similar festivities, it was part of their time legislating over England, right? When they held a lot of authority, and a lot of people, in fact, you could probably say most people throughout the country, were not very pleased, right? They were not into at least that aspect of their rule, and a lot of other aspects as well, right? This is during the era of the English Civil War, a lot of chaos, uprisings, warfare, so there was sort of a lot going on, and, you know, though it may seem sort of strange today, the banning of Christmas and Christmas festivities, it was part of a real political struggle at the time.
Thanks so much to Factor for keeping us history-loving beans well-fed fast this busy holiday season. Okay, Matt, you're probably saying, just why did the Puritans go to war against Christmas? Kinda sounds like a losing proposition, right? I mean, Christmas is too likable, too charismatic, and most importantly, too profitable. Come to think of it, it kind of feels to me like the 1600s equivalent of going to war with Taylor Swift. Politicians take note, not a great plan. But seen from their perspective, the Puritan case against Christmas made a decent amount of sense for them. To many 17th century Calvinists, like the English Puritans and the Scots Presbyterians, Christmas represented everything they wanted to eliminate from both worship and society at large. You see, their primary rejection of Christmas was theological. Puritans believed that the Bible was the literal word of God, and that any religious practice without scriptural basis was an illegitimate, worldly, and corrupt practice.
Yeah, and as we saw, to be fair, it's not just the English Puritans, it's the Presbyterians in Scotland as well. Like, some of this was a little more general, right? They take the Bible very literally. They live by it explicitly. I mean, in the way they interpreted it, right? Everyone's got sort of their own interpretation of the book, the holy book. But, you know, they interpreted it as they saw literally, attempted to live by it. And so they saw Christmas. Now remember, Christmas at this time is very different than Christmas today. Christmas today has its, you know, own set of traditions, myths, some of which were around then, a lot weren't. It's very commercialized today. It's very secular today. But even Christmas at that time, right? It was sort of this extended celebration, essentially a wintertime celebration, right? People are going through a hard time. It's winter. Food is often short. It's a time to get together, bring some food together, celebrate, right? And a lot of that stuff is not in the Bible. And of course, this is also an era when politics and religion are very closely intermingled, especially to the Puritans. I think for them, religion was intermingled with everything, right? There was no separation of religion from politics, with religion from worldly affairs, right? It was bound together. And so for them, they see all these practices and they say, these are not proper Christian practices. These are not in the Bible. These are worldly. They're corrupt. Get rid of them.
To them, these unscriptural practices were twisting God's law, which were wrongly tolerated by the Church of England. This, of course, meant things like saints, popes, and transubstantiation, but also...
Right, and the Puritans had a big issue with the Church of England, right? Of course, the Church of England had broken away from the Catholic Church. We've got the Reformation, all that type of jazz. But for the Puritans, they look at the Church of England, and to them, it's still far too close to the old Catholic Church. They see a lot of remnants of the Catholic Church, the Catholic hierarchy, Catholic practices, and they want to do away with all of that kind of stuff.
All holy days, or holidays, apart from the Sabbath. After all, no one...
They want a more literal, ascetic version of Christianity, right? They want to live exactly in accordance with their principles, and of course, this is one of the reasons why some of those Puritans, some from England go to the Netherlands, and many of those go to the American colonies, and then many Puritans would follow, is because they want to create their own exclusive communities where they can live exactly as they desire and force others to live exactly as they desire, exactly in line with their interpretation of Scripture.
Celebrates Christmas or Easter in the Bible, so Puritans didn't either. According to one famous Puritan saying, there could be no holy days for a man who believed every day was holy. But Christmas was set out for special condemnation by the Puritans, partially because it to them seemed particularly Catholic. After all, Christmas literally means Christ's Mass, and they considered every ritual associated with it, from Christmas Eve to Advent to Epiphany and the figure of Father Christmas, a version of Saint Nicholas, as sordid popish symbols. And that last one was bad, because Puritans hated Catholics, who had repressed the group both in England and on the continent.
They've got some real beef with Catholics, both sort of politically and ideologically. And like I said, one of the reasons they're pissed at the Church of England is because, frankly, they feel it's too close to the Catholic Church, right? And like I said, Puritans had different approaches. Some wanted to reform the church. These are sort of your more moderates. A lot of Puritans wanted sort of an overthrow of the system. I mean, we get the English Civil War. For many of them, this is their, they hope this will be their revolution to overthrow the corrupt religious order. And some of them decide on separation. Well, we can't have what we want in England, we're leaving. Many of whom go to the American colonies, right? So they've got a couple different approaches, but yeah, more than anything, they hate the Catholics.
Giving them a neurotic paranoia about anything that resembled the Roman Church. And that included the Church of England, which had kept many Catholic-style rituals. In fact, the pilgrims who'd left to found Plymouth were not so much seeking religious freedom as they were fleeing to find a colony where they were free to not tolerate other religions.
Yeah, no, they said exactly what I've been saying, right? They want separation from Catholicism. They feel the Church of England isn't enough separated. And there's this idea, I think maybe less popular now, but among the sort of myths of American creation, the creation of the young American colonies, that these Puritans, they fled for religious freedom. They were being persecuted. They wanted freedom to practice and live. Now, there's some truth to that. The Puritans had faced persecution, but primarily the Puritans, the ones who were fleeing, who were going from England or the Netherlands to the Americas, what they're really doing is not necessarily searching for religious freedom, but like they said, they want the freedom to force others to live as they wish, right? It's not enough for them to be allowed to practice privately in their own way, or publicly in their own way, right? Which is what we sort of view as religious freedom today, right? The ability to practice your own religion in a way of your choosing. No, that's not what they want. They want to set up their own exclusive communities and force everyone to live that way. The Puritans were incredibly religiously intolerant, right? That's what they want. Not religious freedom. They would have scoffed at the idea. They wanted religious intolerance, just a Puritan version of it. not an Anglican or a Catholic version, right? That's what a lot of these people were seeking. Now, that's not to say that no one sought for religious freedom in the Americas, in the colonies. A lot of people did. The Quakers are maybe a better example. But the Puritans, that's generally not what they were looking for. They wanted to set up their own godly communities exactly as they envisioned.
Yet, if there was anything Puritans detested as much as Catholicism, it was practices they considered pagan. And medieval Christmas had those in spades. See, Puritans were extremely aware that as Christianity spread, its holidays had picked up elements of local pre-Christian festivals, such as decking the halls with plants and burning Yule logs. Similarly, they pointed out that the date of Christmas had supposedly been picked in Roman times to compete with the Roman festival of Saturnalia, and that Jesus would not have been born in December. In fact,
yeah, I mean, a lot of people throughout history have celebrated holidays at particular times. You might have a harvest season holiday. Today in the United States, we have Thanksgiving. There have been those types of holidays throughout history. You might have a holiday in the winter season, right? Like I said, everything's getting cold. Food is getting less common. To gather together, be around other people, stay warm, literally, and bring together what food you have, right? All that sort of thing. And so, when you have a religion like Christianity, the young Christianity, as it spread, it would sort of take some of these existing holidays, often pagan holidays, and sort of morph them into something a little more Christian, right? And so they would keep some of those pagan practices. It's not a bad way to get people on board with your religion if you say to them, hey, you can keep celebrating your winter holiday. Now it's just going to be a Christian holiday. That gets people on board relatively easily. But if you're someone who's very concerned with sort of the purity of Christianity and Christian holidays, this is going to greatly upset you.
In fact, the holiday had so little to do with Christianity, they actually nicknamed it Fool's Tide to demean anyone practicing it. In addition, British Christmas was, how do I put it, a little much.
Oh.
Back then, Christmas was loud. Christmas was celebrated in the streets, and everyone got really, 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 really drunk. This was medieval-style Christmas, before it was toned down. There was holly and gift-giving and feasting, sure, but also massive displays of chaos.
Yeah, I mean, we see some of the parts of Christmas that we'd recognize today, but also, as with many holidays, sort of from the medieval era into the early modern era, which is where we're at in this timeline, there was just a lot of partying in the streets. People getting drunk, merry, hanging out, going crazy, breaking stuff, drinking in the streets, festivals. That's what all of these holidays involved. Almost all of them involved some degree of this, right? Public drunkenness and merriment. And once again, if you're the Puritans, this is one of the things you hate the most. People being publicly drunk and publicly happy? Not on your watch.
Rolling parties surged down the streets, and groups of poor subjects would engage in wassailing, the highly violent origin of Christmas caroling.
Oh.
So check this. Intoxicated mobs would go from house to house, singing songs and insisting that they be invited inside for food, gifts, and more booze. If you didn't comply, they might throw cobblestones through your windows or break in and steal stuff anyway. So that carol lyric, "We won't go until we get some," was very, very literal. Actually, on that note,
This is also true for a lot of medieval into early modern festivals, is that when you get a lot of people together, especially if they're drunk, doesn't take much to turn it from sort of a happy event into a mob riot, right? And so that's why everyone's trying to keep their cool, everyone's being happy, because it doesn't take much to tip it over the edge, and we have examples of this throughout history.
a lot of people were also getting some in another sense, because it turns out that Christmas hookups weren't invented by the Hallmark Channel. Christmas was a time for wild merriment, where a peasant would be crowned the Lord of Misrule and give nonsensical orders everyone had to follow. For a few days, servants would act like masters and vice versa. Men would dress as women, people would dress as animals, and of course, all of this revelry and cross-dressing made it pretty easy, for example, for a woman to slip into a group of men and steal a little time for a liaison with her lover. Gambling was also a favored holiday pastime, and in this atmosphere, brawls were nearly inevitable. And one major target of violence? Puritan businesses that refused to close on Christmas, opening as if it was a normal day. The point is that between all of the chugging and slugging, yoinking and boinking, feasting and beasting, a lot of English elites, not just the Puritans, were thinking things had gotten out of hand.
Right. I mean, the Puritans have this specific ideological issue, and you can see why for all the reasons we have discussed. But, as I said, a lot of English elites, aristocrats, but also some non-aristocrats at this point, they don't like this, because what do English elites hate the most? Mobs of people getting together. They don't like it, It involves people getting together, maybe getting a little rowdy, get into fights, perhaps smashing up a business every once in a while. There's a great fear of mob violence, mob rule, the mob, right? During this era, and it extends further into history, even when you get some of these more Republican thinkers, in this and the following century/centuries, even if they're more into sort of Republican politics, they don't like the whole idea of democracy, right? The idea of mob rule. It frightens them, right? So this idea of the mob, TM copyright, is something that a lot of upper class people are fearful of in this era.
Especially since, remember, Christmas lasted 12 whole days, from Christmas Eve to Epiphany. So, in 1640, the Presbyterian Church in Scotland banned Christmas. Officially, this remained the case until 1956, and as a result, most of the holiday revelry moved to New Year's Eve, or Hogmanay, as the Scots call it. However,
we do call it that. Big celebrations on Hogmanay. I will say, despite the fact that it is officially banned, and we'll see the same thing in England, it's not observed that much. Now, it depends. For a certain amount of time, these bans were enforced. Sometimes they weren't. But that doesn't mean that there was no Christmas in Scotland for that whole time. Absolutely not. People didn't observe it that much or for that long.
English Puritans
observe the ban, I mean. They did observe Christmas. They celebrated.
Defeat Christmas so easily. In 1642, Puritan members of Parliament, leveraging a budget crisis to squeeze concessions out of King Charles I, managed to push through legislation that called for a day of prayer and fasting on the last Wednesday of the month. This didn't go well for a number of reasons. Firstly, standoffs like this would go increasingly bad, leading to a series of civil wars between Parliament, royalists supporting Charles, and the Scots. Second, it set the stage for a clash over Christmas. On Christmas in 1643, rioters struck Puritan businesses that opened on the day, and in 1644, with Parliament in control of London and Christmas falling on the monthly fast day, Parliament announced that Christmas was cancelled. Not only did they ban Christmas, but also Christmas Eve services, decorating with holly, wassailing, pies, plum pudding, or any outward symbol of the holiday.
So you can see how this becomes a bigger political issue. A sort of culture war issue becomes an actual war issue, right? So it's one of these things where we've seen the ideological reasons behind it, etc., etc., but now it gets all tangled up in the English Civil War, right? Attacking Puritan businesses on Christmas. Now it's not just it's, whatever, they don't want to celebrate. It's, I'm opposed to the Puritan takeover and the parliamentarians. I'm a royalist. Let's actually lead a mob and destroy this business, right? It's becoming more and more political and more tied up with the politics of the era. It's become a political issue at the parliamentary level.
People resisted the ban, quietly gathering to celebrate in homes or public houses, transforming the holiday into a more intimate affair between friends and family rather than the whole community. But that didn't mean there still weren't occasional explosions of violence, the worst of which came on Christmas Day 1647 in Canterbury. There, the mayor went to the market square to force local shops to open and was met by an unruly crowd of 500 people determined to make the season merry and bright. They descended, sacking every shop that opened and pushing the mayor down in the gutter. Then, after he got back up in his muddy, torn robes and ordered them all to disperse, they did something even worse, kicking off, quite literally, a highly destructive Christmas tradition. They played football.
Oh, wow.
But not soccer as we know it. No. The old medieval football, which was essentially a riot with a ball involved, played on city streets. They flooded through Canterbury, yelling, "Conquest!" and singing raucous carols while kicking, heading, and throwing balls back and forth. They ripped up bushes and forcibly decorated houses, and of course got really, really drunk.
It's just about the most English scene of all time. A bunch of drunk Englishmen running through the streets, kicking a football around. I don't think I could imagine anything more English.
What would come to be known as the Plum Pudding Riot actually marked a turning point in the English Civil Wars, because the trial of the rioters the next year turned into a political football. And though the defendants were acquitted, the anger over the prosecutions again filled the streets. This time, the violence turned into a full-on uprising, part of a tide of pro-royalist insurrections in 1648 that showed resistance to parliamentarian rule was nowhere near over.
Yeah, it leads to another wave of fighting. And I mean, we'll see the consequences of that, but it shows you that, you know, of course, it was a civil war. England was split over this. There were a lot of people who sided with the parliamentarians, but there were also a lot of people, average people, who living under, you know, the rule of the parliamentarians, we're talking about the Puritans in this case, were not entirely satisfied, or were not satisfied at all, and could be full royalists, or maybe, you know, not everyone is so polarized one side or the other. Maybe they didn't love the royalists, but they also hated this new order. Or maybe some of them were like, hey, wait a minute, let's get the king back, this stinks, right? So it showed the continuing tension over the English Civil War, and as we're seeing here, it would, in some ways, you know, this wave of riots, not just in Canterbury, but throughout the country, this, along with Charles signing a deal with Scotland to sort of invade England and reignite warfare, you know, all these things combined, it would reignite another wave of warfare and keep the war going.
The next year, in fear of further royalist uprisings, King Charles lost his head. But Christmas resistance
And that is the ultimate consequence I was talking about.
is continued, with pro-holiday pamphlets arguing for reviving the celebration and its place in Christianity. Christmas remained banned in England until 1660, when the Puritan-led Commonwealth fell, and Charles's son, Charles II, was invited to take the throne on behalf of the deposed Stuarts. And there are historians who argue that moves like the banning of Christmas did contribute to the fall of Puritan rule.
Wow.
Because people like their parties. Again, never fight Tay-Tay. Yet, in a way, the Puritans won as well. For English Christmas would never be as raucous as it was before the ban, and celebrations moved inside of the...
I'm sure the Puritans did not feel like they had won, you know? And to my understanding, also, there is this ban on Christmas. It was overthrown in the restoration of the throne, or the crown, I should say. But I think already by the late 1650s, the ban on Christmas was starting to not be observed super closely, you know? Maybe the government realized it weren't having such a good time enforcing it, wasn't really gaining them popularity, but even before the ban was overturned, it wasn't an incredibly effective ban. Though as they're saying, it did reduce a lot of this, you know, raucous activity in the streets, bringing the holiday to a more intimate, personal, sort of family level.
home. However, in colonial America, Christmas would remain illegal until 1681, but even after the act was repealed, celebrations were still generally private. Congress met on Christmas in 1802, and it wasn't until 1870 when President Grant made it a public holiday, officially declaring an end to the war on Christmas. It's over, y'all. And you know, to celebrate this momentous moment in history, I've decided I'm not going to do dishes until the new year. And thanks to Factor, I can make that holiday dream a reality. Factor is my absolute favorite ready-to-eat meal delivery service that I've been subscribed to for over a year.
I'll let their ad play through. This is a new video, so I'll link their video down below. You can go check it out, leave them a like, subscribe, check out their sponsor. We'll let the ad play through. So, you know, go check them out for making these fantastic videos.
And add-on options. Ooh, hello, cold-pressed juices. And they really do have so many options to choose from. I can be sure that everyone in my household is gonna get the food that they love fast. Case in point, I just devoured their tomato basil chicken risotto, and straight up, it rivaled a few of my favorite Italian restaurants that I will not be putting on blast here. And with all the time I saved, I was able to stay on schedule and get all of my EC work done before our holiday break. Damn, I'm good. And you can get your first Factor box for 50% off.
All right, there we go. There's their link. Go use it if you so desire. So this was another good video. We got to talk about the old Puritans. And by the way, they talked about the American colonies Of course, not all of them. In fact, most of them were not Puritan. But, of course, in England, there was a lot of resistance against this. If you look at, like, Massachusetts Bay government, the colony, I mean, that was supposed to be a Puritan colony for Puritans. Now, that was not entirely the case, and especially over time, it would become less and less and less Puritan. But it was there where they could truly sort of enforce their religious doctrine to the best of their ability. Until, as I said, over time, that became less and less true. But even more so than England, they had a lot of authority there. Of course, with the restoration of the crown, some things started to change. But, Puritans, an interesting group. Sometimes, I think, misconstrued a little bit. But we got to talk a bit about that here. And a bit about Christmas for one of our festive reactions this year. So once again, happy holidays to everyone. Hope you guys are all having a great day today. If you enjoyed this one, I'd appreciate it if you'd leave a like, subscribe, check out my Patreon, which is linked down below. And with all of that, I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.